Before we begin this week's episode, I just want to let you guys know that we do have next month's released episode already on the Patreon page. That episode is uncut and it features Grand Taxation Civil War. We have the two devs that are responsible for the game on the interview, and it was an incredible interview. If you don't want to wait a month, be sure to head to our Patreon page. It's in the description, and have a listen. Now, let's get on with the show. Welcome everyone to episode 21 of Combat Mission. Welcome everyone to episode 21 of Developer Dialogue. I'm your host, Jean, the Strategy Wargamer. So this is the second time we're actually redoing this. It was a technical glitch on my end. And I want to start the episode by welcoming our special guest, Stephen Grammont, the head of Battlefront and the legendary Combat Mission series. Welcome, Stephen. How are you doing?
Very good. Pleased to be here.
So before I kind of tangle things up a little bit, I found out that Combat Mission released 21 years ago.
21 years ago.
21 years ago. And this is the 21st episode. So I was saying this is kind of kismet. So, it's meant to be.
It is meant to be. Yep.
So, November, pretty big month. Like I was saying earlier, at least for me, primarily because, Combat Mission Cold War came out on Steam. And I believe you guys released in spring on Battlefront.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was sometime in the, I was trying to think of when exactly it was, sometime in the summer, I think June or July. It's funny that I can remember 21 years ago releases, but I can't remember it just 6 months ago.
Yeah, I feel you on that too. My memory is horrible. I'm lucky I remember this morning's breakfast. Actually, I actually don't really remember what I ate, actually, now that I think about it. Anyway, that's beside the point. So before we kind of dive in, can you tell us a little bit about Combat Mission Cold War for those that are not familiar with Combat Mission Cold War, since it's just a recent release?
Sure. This is our first foray into what could be described as alternative history, in that we are allowing people to fight the conventional war that thankfully did not happen in the Cold War.
Thankfully.
And you go up against the Soviet forces in Germany and with U.S. forces and try to make the best of it.
Yeah, so this I believe focuses on Europe primarily, and I think I'm not 100% like familiar with the Cold War, but I know I'm gonna butcher this name. The Flood Gap was
Oh my God. Yep,
yes, there you go.
that's the primary area. We also include the National Training Center in Fort Irwin, which allows you to experience what it was like back then to go up against basically a mock Soviet force in the desert. Is for people who don't know, this uh, NTS is the NTC rather is the way that battalions are certified for being combat ready, and that
Oh,
still happens today.
oh, that's interesting. And I know the this kind of release was a pretty big one because I think this is your first time touching on the Cold War, correct?
Yes, so we up until this point we have not done anything that basically is what I was calling alternative history. So something simulating a time in the past and some form of combat that did not occur. So we've done historical stuff, obviously, World War II, and we have done future, which would be Shock Force and Black Sea. But Cold War was the first time we went back in time and simulated something that for sure did not happen.
And I'm kind of curious, why did you guys kind of
because you guys have a lot of combat mission titles. Why did it take you this? Why did you guys put off Cold War for, I guess 21 years? Why was it? Is it because of the technology? I know modern conflict requires, well, just a lot more graphics.
Well, the first game in the series in the Comet Mission 2 engine was near future and being Shock Force. And when we did that, we were saying that we didn't want to do an alternative history. We didn't want to
Hmm.
do like Soviets versus the Allies, 1946, that sort of thing. We really wanted to focus on things that either were could plausibly happen in the near future or had already certainly happened. And we had people right from the very get-go saying, "Oh, please do Cold War, please do Cold War, please do Cold War." And we kept saying, "Nah, no, we're not going to." Um, and in part, we said we're not going to because we were unsure that our core audience would like to go on that journey with us back in time to something that didn't happen. And there certainly was a very strong lobby all along trying to convince us that it would be a safe bet. And what happened was over time, Shock Force and then Shock Force 2 and Black Sea in between them, they were all near future, but the games kept selling and were very popular after the near future time frame had passed. So Shock Force 2 uh, or Shock Force and Shock Force 2 is 2008, 2009 time frame. So when we released it, it hadn't happened yet, but now obviously it's quite a while ago, and so now that is effectively alternative history. It
Hmm.
wasn't when we made it, but it is now. And the games, both Blacks and Black Sea, was set in 2014. Just we were just finishing it when Russia invaded Ukraine. Um, so that kind of that kind of made things a bit more interesting. But now even that is alternative history. So the games are still very popular and selling quite well. So we figured, all right, I guess we sold ourselves short, and away we went.
Yeah, I remember when that happened. I was thinking, I was like, did they have like direct lines of Putin? Like, did they know what was going on?
I
It was
mean,
a really,
is that obvious?
but yeah, that game really was. I mean, when you guys released that, that was I mean, for me, that was like, I guess because like everything just lined up, was a like instant buy for me. So I'm kind of curious, for Cold War, right? There's a lot of people have played combat missions from the previous ones, from like Beyond Overlord, Barbarossa to Berlin, to Shock Force. What new features and like effects can they expect to see in this new game, in the Cold War game?
Well, for the most part, we didn't have to add too much because we are simulating real combat, and by the time we finished up Black Sea, we had pretty much gotten in almost all of the contemporary modern warfare features, including amphibious capabilities. So from kind of the technology standpoint, we we really didn't have anything entirely new. Sure, the guns, the cannons on tanks were different. The anti-missile systems were more primitive. But the only really new thing that we had to do was cluster munitions, whether
Hmm.
that be from air delivery or artillery. That had not been in any of the combat missions before, largely because, uh, at least on the Allied side, the NATO side, the doctrine at the time that we released Black Sea and Shock Force was to not use those weaponry. Um,
Uh,
they, I don't think we can count on the Russians to withhold them, and we actually saw some of them deployed in in Syria. So
Oh.
the I from what I've heard, the thinking has come around and changed a bit again to be more of a Cold War mentality. And back in the Cold War, the thought was use everything we have, maybe even nukes. So nothing was off the table back then. Certainly, cluster munitions were considered a frontline, ready to go weapon. So Cold War really needed to have those available to them to do full, basically the full spectrum of combat, except for tactical nukes. That, that we, yeah, for obvious reasons, that doesn't play out very well in the at a small level, small unit level.
Yeah, that might be a quick scenario.
Very, very quick. It it,
Uh,
rem-
I,
it reminds me of some of the scenarios in the Eastern Front, like the first 10, 15 minutes of some of the battles in Bagration were just like, well, Germans, take all your forces and just remove them from the map because they're just going to be laid waste.
yep, pretty much. But I will say those cluster weapons, the graphics that you guys implemented on that was kind of jaw-dropping. When I saw those actually in effect in the game, I was like, wow, okay, that was really cool animation.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of the nasty weapons do look cool.
Unfortunately. Um, so I'm kind of curious. What engine are you guys using for Combat Mission Cold War? Is it the similar one that you've used for the previous games?
Yes, it's constantly updating and evolving, and the improvements made are rolled into the other ones. We haven't done an engine-wide upgrade in a while, and we are still planning on doing upgrade 5, but we've been
Ooh,
constantly distracted by other things, including the Cold War. We we added the capability of playing using Slytherin's play by email system, which is an automated email system which allows you to do player finding and carry forward games. And something that people have wanted from Combat Mission since the old days. It's just not something that we ever felt we had the resources to implement. So we implemented that for Cold War, and it was way more challenging than we expected because um, uh, it Slytherin's API was written in a different language than we use, and so we had to do a lot of translations and libraries, and anytime you work with a server is unbelievably fun, apparently. And then on top of that, yeah, the problem was that their system was not designed for a game of our size. They were used to handling turns in kilobytes, maybe even megabytes, and our turns sometimes come in at 100 um, meg, and so it was
wow.
we stressed out their infrastructure a bit, but we got that all settled. It just took a lot longer than we expected.
Yeah, I really love that PVM Plus system that they have. It does make it a lot more, I guess, a smoother transition playing multiplayer, which I'm really glad that you guys incorporated into your system here. Which kind of leads me to my next question. So I'm gonna kind of like go off the rails a little bit because I had like a couple of questions lined up, but I'll come back to them. So since you brought up Matrix games and Slytherin, I'm kind of curious. So the Combat Mission Cold War came out. You were mentioning summer 2021, and then we released on Steam November 2021. I'm kind of curious. Why, I'm sure there's I'm sure that it required a lot of work, but was there a delay? What goes into the process of making a Steam release versus a release on Battlefront.com?
So it was the for this particular release, it was purely the major delay was the implementation of the PBM function.
Uh,
So Slytherin very wisely wanted this to be in the game right out of the box. They didn't want to start selling it and then wrap it in as a patch later on. And we agreed with that. That made total sense. The problem from our end was we were ready to release the game, uh, and we didn't want to hold it back off of our website, off of our regular sales, because we had told people for months that it was going to be available, and then we came up with this PBM strategy, and so they very quickly agreed. They said, "All right, well, why don't you release it on your website, and then when you get the technology implemented, then we'll release it for Steam and on Matrix." And we said, "Yeah, that sounds great." And we expected there to only be maybe about a month, maybe 6 weeks delay between the two. But as I alluded to, the technical hurdles of getting involved, and then we had the inevitable thing when you start doing a project that is only a couple of people are involved in the important bits. Then you get into uh, somebody got married, and so
Oh.
suddenly we didn't have that person for 4 weeks, and we we kept working, but there were certain things that went slower or had to wait, and um, so it was just the technical stuff, the end of summer weddings and vacations interfered with it more than we expected it would, and we fortunately were able to get it out for November, because otherwise it wouldn't be out until January, because nobody releases in this close to Christmas,
Yeah, and
or nobody should. It's not a good time.
I guess that's probably why they do the. I guess that's why like December is kind of like a kind of a dead month for game releases.
Yeah, yeah. They typically, even before Black Friday became the crazy thing that it became, the mentality was to ship right around Thanksgiving, and that has been the traditional target for most games since forever, I think. And the closer you get to Christmas, uh, the more competition you have with life, and that is something that
That's a hard
game
balancing
re-
act.
game releases. Yeah, it is a balancing act.
Yeah, but I'm kind of curious. So you guys got this whole PBM system, integrated. Everything's working good. So I'm kind of curious. So for like the next combat mission, do you guys have to do any major modifications to it, or are they? Do you guys plan to release both simultaneously on like Battlefront.com and Steam?
Yes, the all the hard stuff is done.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
the all the code is integrated into the engine itself, and it just so happened that Cold War was the first one. So what we plan on doing, we're gonna let Christmas go, and we will start re-releasing the remaining combat mission product on Steam and Matrix throughout 2022, and we'll also include patches so that Black Sea and Shock Force 2, which are already available through Slytherin and through Matrix and Steam, those will then be able to use the PBM feature as well.
Wow. Okay, that's awesome. I love that you mentioned that. It's basically a free update. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah, and that's always been the strategy, is that the something that helps a player play the game should never be charged for. That that should just be integrated into the core system. And because we are working off of one game engine, for the most part, it is no special. It doesn't present any special difficulties to extend something like that to all of the games. The the tricky bit is just doing patches takes a long time because we have so many games and each
Oh
one
yeah.
has to be tested. Each one has its own quirks for on the compiling side. So sometimes we upload the 4 gig file. The testers in 5 seconds say, "Oh, we noticed that this doesn't work." Okay, then we have to go back and do the whole thing. So we try to avoid doing the kind of game engine wide updates. We try to wait until we've got enough to justify it. Otherwise, we could be spending all of our time doing nothing but releasing helter-skelter patches for every small improvement that we make.
Yeah, and I this kind of like leads me to another question. I'm so off the rails at this point, but it's okay. Because a buddy of mine was asking, he was like, "All right, what's gonna?" He is a diehard combat mission fanatic, right? He plays. Me and him actually have been playing Combat Mission Africa Corps, an oldie but a goodie. Uh, and so he was mentioning, he was like, when will we, will, first he asked, like, will we see these legendary titles, right? You know, Africa Corps, Barbarossa Berlin, the first Shock Force, everything migrate over to Steam. Are we going to see that whole catalog move over?
Yeah, well, the whole current catalog for sure. The we have there are some issues with the original 3 games in terms of hardware compatibility, which is not surprising. Well, it's actually surprising that it took this long to really start to see significant compatibility issues, and there's no going back and correcting the code for them. So I'd have to dust off our conversations with Slytherin from, I don't know, about 2 years ago when we made the decision to hold off doing anything with them. We may revisit that. They are available through GOG, but um, that's always a buyer. Well, it's always a buyer beware thing with them. So we don't know. There are certainly no plans for the first 3 combat missions uh, to go on to Steam. But and the original Shock Force, there's really no reason for it to go on because Shock Force 2 brought all that material forward and improved the engine at the same time. And the only other one we have that's kind of an orphan is CM Afghanistan, which
Um,
was done on the original game engine that Shock Force was done on. But we don't own the content. That was done through a partnership with a Russian developer that has since gone out of business. And
oh,
I've been in touch with one of the guys, and he promised to get back to me, and he has not. That was earlier this year. The problem he said is that he's not sure who owns the content because the company dissolved.
oh wow.
So, um, yeah, we, so that's kind of a lesson to uh, always keep the stuff in house if you really want to make sure that it lasts long term.
I
But
guess
that
that
was actually that partnership turned out great for everybody. It's just unfortunate that we're in the position we're in now. So
that's what, and this is where the point where the lawyers come in and get paid their checks.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. So that's the thing is that probably nothing bad would happen if we started selling it, but or we have the rights to sell it, but we don't have the technical right to modify it. So we're still selling it on our website, but it's the old engine, and we think we're in legally questionable territory if we kind of repackaged it. Um, and like I said, probably nothing negative would come from it, but we just don't feel right about putting in the time and effort into something that we're a little unsure of.
Yeah, no, I can totally understand that. All right, so I'm gonna kind of like do like the Michael Jackson kind of walk backwards a little bit, and kind of just jump back into that engine a little bit. Um,
Hmm.
One question I had was I wanted to ask, like, what are the limitations of this engine that you're using? What kind of things can it not do? Because I've seen a lot of things that it can do, and it's absolutely gorgeous and just amazing. One thing I just found out, like, I was just playing recently. I had a team that actually blew up a wall. It's like, oh, I didn't know I could blow up the wall. I was like, that's pretty cool. But
Yeah.
uh, so what can the engine not do?
Well, for the most part, the engine is not designed to handle anything other than what we would consider contemporary warfare, and that
Oh,
has its roots going all the way back to World War II. So anything that is out of basically outside of the spectrum of current warfare and going back to World War II, the engine really isn't designed for it, and that even includes World War One. We we stressed out the system pretty hard when we introduced the Italians in the Italian forces in Fortress Italy because
oh,
they were essentially still based around a World War One mindset, and it it's hard to describe why that is such a problem, but it is. I mean, their squads were the size of platoons, and it
hmm.
it did create a bunch of headaches, and but it wasn't too bad because their squad size were basically operating sort of like platoon anyway. Um,
Oh, okay.
in reality, they kind of adopted contemporary World War II tactics, but they were still structured like a World War One system, which uh, it's not surprising the Italians just didn't do so well on the ground from any kind of operational standpoint. So
Yeah,
yeah, so definitely nothing outside of that realm. Um, there are particular challenges with from a graphical standpoint for doing something like jungles. Really heavy vegetation is really it stresses the engine out, and of
oh,
course, if you're talking about tropical environments, either Vietnam or the Pacific theater, there's concerns that we couldn't really model the terrain effectively from a technical standpoint.
yeah.
And
So
we,
you're already in my next question because that was exactly my next question. I wanted to ask, was the engine capable? Because I noticed like the whole catalog, right? Going through combat mission. I mean, all these games are incredible. I've yet to find a combat mission game that's not amazing, right? Um, and I was going through it, and I just realized, wait, there is no Pacific games here. Like, and I just realized
yeah,
that, and so it's because of that. That's the reason why.
well, it's that's a big part of it. The other part of it is that internally we are all geared towards European combat, and so there's still so much that we haven't touched in Europe. It's one of those things like, well, if we ran out of things to do in Europe, then that might be a different situation. But if we only have a limited amount of development time and energy, uh, there are things that are easier for us to do that wouldn't be stressing out the game engine. For example, doing a different time frame in on the Western Front, or expanding it to into Finland, um,
Ooh,
or doing the 1941 campaign through the Balkans. So into Greece. So there was thinking, well, and even we haven't done North Africa in the new engine in Combat Mission 2. So there's still so much to do. If we had the time to do them, we would go to them first because we know we could do those fairly easily from a technical standpoint. Um, Still very time consuming, and that's why the Pacific Theater is constantly shuffled off. And I will say that Cold War fit into that category as well, until after Black Sea when we felt we had the environment down. Um, and so going from the 2014 temperate environment against a Soviet or Russian forces using pretty much Soviet equipment, and going backwards to the 1970s or 1980s was far easier for us to do than to jump into Cold War from directly, say, from World War II or even from Shock Force. So the barrier had come down for that particular time frame. And then on top of that, and here's my chance to give a shout out to the guys who really made Cold War happen because they pestered us relentlessly for 20 years and were instrumental in getting us, not only making us see that this was something we could do, but they did all the hard work. So we had Bill, Warren, and Chris, and also um, a whole host of others that got brought in um, at after we got started. But the having Chris as an employee and having him be on the inside and knowing how to do the all the technical stuff, that was and him being a total Cold War fanatic, um, that allowed us to move forward with it because we had other things on our plates. And if it weren't, if Chris was not capable of doing the technical side of things, um, then it probably wouldn't happen. And then we had Justin and a whole, uh, I can't even name all the people that came in to do scenarios and testing. We found out that pretty much our entire traditional corral of testers were Cold War fanatics. So we
Oh.
had we had absolutely no problem finding testers to push that one over. And special thanks to them. It was their involvement in the play by email functionality at the end was critical because
Oh.
the kinds of technical problems that we were running into were things would work fine on two different machines and then they wouldn't, and somebody would get one battle going and it would stop for them, but not for the other person. And without those guys pitching in, um, and it on short notice very often, uh, yeah, we would still be tinkering around with it now, and we're not. So thanks to them.
So I'm kind of curious. So, is any part of that community that you were just mentioning, the testers, have any interest in, let's say, like a conflict like Vietnam or the Korean conflict? I know Korea is like the forgotten war, so it'd probably be a little bit more easier to do a Korean conflict. But I wanted to kind of focus more on the Vietnam, um, for two reasons. One, is your community somewhat interested in going that direction? And I guess my second question to that would be, is it, are we at the time where we can do a Vietnam War conflict? Because I know, the ethical issues come up in that regard of like, hey, is it too soon? We came across that with a couple of years ago where somebody was trying to remake the Battle of Fallujah while we were still
Yeah,
in Iraq. So
yeah.
I can imagine, Vietnam could possibly still be in that realm. What are your thoughts?
Oh, there's definitely interest amongst our fan base and also our testers. There's no question about it. I think from from a marketing standpoint, I think it would do pretty well now. 20 years ago, I don't think it would have. Um, and the game engine, in some ways, is actually set up for it because we
Oh,
have unconventional forces supported in Shock Force, and that would allow the Viet Cong to play a role in the game. But again, like I said, the main the main impediment for doing that is we don't believe that the game engine would handle the graphical simulation in that environment very well. And that's a big problem because if the game is not capable of pushing the polygons or um, easily allowing people to see where their units are in really clogged terrain. And of course, there's a lot of it was a lot of the combat took place in paddies and rice paddies, so it's not pure jungle. But if we can't do the pure jungle, then that's a problem. And then it also gets to our point of there are things that probably more of our customer base are clamoring for that we could do easier and without the technical risks. So, um, yeah, I don't see Vietnam happening, and I don't see, but I don't see any kind of intellectual reasons why and marketing reasons why it couldn't.
what parts of the I know you were mentioning the terrain, but like when the engine's like generating, like let's say Idrang Valley, right? Where would the engine have like difficulties developing the terrain? Is it the would it put it too much stress on the GPU or the CPU?
Yeah, so there's two problems. One that we're using f the foliage system we use in combat mission was never we had to hand make that and it was never all that good from an efficiency standpoint. And so in other words, a lot of CPU cycles were chewed up doing the trees. And in our defense, that has always been the big problem with 3D games. And uh, Speed Tree was available as a solution and a very good solution. And we looked into that, but uh, they wanted an enormous amount of money, and they were not willing
Oh.
to scale for a small publication, a small publisher like us. So basically, they were saying, "Yeah, here's the same deal we gave um, Call of Duty." Yeah, okay, okay, great. They had $50 million budget. Um, thank you. So, but very exciting for anybody using the Unity engine. All the games out there that are using the Unity engine. Um, Unity recently acquired B-Tree and they are integrating
Oh.
it into the Unity philosophy. So
Oh.
I think I'm not following the the nuts and bolts news on all that stuff, but I would expect that games coming out in the future will have um, a lot better foliage and at faster rates because it's the tricky thing. It's not just showing it. There's the how do you see your units through all this vegetation? And with because if you can't see your units, then you got a user interface issue right
Yeah.
there. Not only that, but people want to see their guys shooting stuff. Um, and it in the combat mission engine, it's you can't selectively turn off the trees. You can't say, all right, well, I combat's happening here, kind of defoliate this whole area and keep the rest foliated. The engine wasn't because of we were hand coding all this stuff that was not really a practical something that we could do practically. Um, But and that's not something that we can recode into the game engine because it would involve ripping out a very large chunk of the core graphics engine, and there's really not much of an incentive for us to do that at this point with the engine being as old as it is. Because once you start monkeying around with the basic components of an engine, you very quickly get into a point of diminishing returns, and you might have been better off just throwing the whole thing out and starting over.
Yeah, I've noticed Paradox does that a lot of times with their games. And so somebody actually had to explain that to me. Just creating a new engine creates a whole frees up a lot of capabilities that the old one wasn't able to. So, which kind of leads me to my next question. When I'm playing, any kind of combat mission game, whether it be Black Sea or Cold War, the one thing that's like I is always in the back of my head that I always want, and I wanted to ask you, would this be something possible, in the next engine or even possibly the current engine? Would it be possible to have aerial aircraft or choppers physically represented on the battlefield?
Hmm. Yep.
Oh,
That of course has been that was a want even back for Shock Force 1.
oh,
Um, and we didn't feel so there's let's see, one, two, three. I'd say there's three issues with showing the combat aircraft. One is it's a whole bunch of models that we have to make, or I mean nowadays we could probably purchase decent ones. Um, because they're flying in the air and they're going so fast, people are unlikely to scrutinize the details as much as the ground-based vehicles. So that's probably not that big of a deal anymore. Um, the second issue is now the game engine has to simulate things explicitly in 3D off the ground, and the game engine was made with certain presumptions and uh, of things being on the ground. So that presents some graphical issues. And then third the third problem is that aircraft behaves completely different from ground vehicles.
a little
So all of the time and energy, yeah, just a little bit.
bit.
So the interesting thing is that a tank does operate in a 3D space, but it is always operating a uh, on a plane, on a ground surface, and with physics limitations in terms of how much it can turn, and the tank can't turn upside down, for example, but a plane can do a barrel roll. A
Mm,
chopper can come in straight up and down, or it can come in at an extreme angle and then reverse thrust. And so there's the physics of doing something like a helicopter is daunting.
that sounds like a lot of
Uh,
work.
yeah, it is a lot of work, and that's why it's not in there. But theoretically, sure. Um, and you of course are not the first to request it because yeah, it's pretty easy to see how awesome it would be to have an Apache come screaming in at kind of camera height, and that yeah, that would just be crazy.
Yeah, that would definitely, just that would definitely be some eye candy right there. Um, Kind of moving over to, I guess, my last two questions, so this way we don't go over an hour. I wanted to, I have a buddy of mine. His name is Bob. He's former coworker of mine back at Apple. He has a top end iMac, right? He has high end AMD GPU. I think it's like a 5750, possibly, I believe, with 16 gigs of video RAM. Just basically an obscene amount of graphical horsepower. and he pretty much owns every single combat mission title. And what he's done recently, he stopped using Boot Camp on his Mac. If you guys are not familiar with Boot Camp, that's basically on a Mac you can run Windows or the Mac OS. So like you can turn on your computer and just boot into Windows and it'll run just like Windows. So what Bob is doing now is he's running a virtual machine inside his Mac, and he was trying to run, I believe, Black Sea, and he was having trouble. And he found out that on the Steam website it says you cannot run a virtual machine, and he wanted me to ask, uh, what kind of limit is it? Like, is that an engine limitation, or where does that like where why is that not possible in a virtualized environment?
The short answer is we don't know. We know that it doesn't. Well, at least we're pretty sure it doesn't work, but we haven't tried to figure out why. And it most likely has to do with the graphical architecture that we're using more than anything, because it's dated. Back when we were doing this, the if somebody had a half gig card that was high end,
Oh yeah, I
and
remember those days.
which was a lot better than the yeah, well, it's a lot better than when we did the first combat mission. 48 meg was that was a better than average card. And I remember when somebody got a 128, and that was ooh. Um, so it doesn't surprise me, just because the game is so hardware intensive, that trying to trying to go through an abstraction layer, such as and virtual machining it. Um, yeah, we have absolutely no idea why it doesn't work, and we're pretty sure it doesn't. Either on a Windows machine or on a Mac. Um, so I guess that's the only answer I have, is not a clue.
Okay. And I guess the other question is, so kind of like Bob, um, I kind of use all three operating systems. I use Mac for like creativity and such. Like this podcast, I'm actually recording on my Mac. I have a Linux box next to me, and unfortunately, I have to use Windows for work. So I get to touch on all three. But one thing that I've noticed in the industry, and Apple kind of, I think even Microsoft actually kind of is getting in on the game too. Apple released their M1 Macs, and the
Yes.
popularity of them are kind of like exploding. And I know Windows is already working with, I think it's like Qualcomm, to bring ARM-based chips to Windows. So I'm kind of curious. So we have like this new kind of like new architecture of a processor coming forward. Um, M1 for Macs, and then I don't know what Windows is going to be using, but it's probably going to be something similar to like what the phones are using. Um, will future combat mission will we see future combat mission titles on these new architectures? And is it possible to play the old ones on these new architectures?
Well, I think it's just like the transition from, at least on the Mac side, it's pretty much the same that happened with the transition from the old 48 systems to PowerPC. Uh, the Am I remembering the chip family? The old Motorola chips to
Oh
the
yeah,
PowerPC structure.
yeah, I
Um,
remember that.
it it basically, uh, you got a speed boost, because the new chip architecture was so superior, um, but you didn't get the kind of boost that you expected, because it was running a lot of stuff in emulation. And I don't know a lot about the M1, but we run on it, so
Oh,
I'm sure, I mean, I haven't heard anybody say we don't, and certainly people Uh, the M1s are out there, so I would expect that by now, if we had some sort of basic incompatibility, we'd know about it.
Oh, okay. Because
But
I'm
what I
actually planning to buy one.
but won't, but what won't happen is there won't be any specific there won't be any major leap in performance, because to do that we would have to support and not just the new chips, the new CPUs, but also um, the advances that have been made in other subsystems, and especially on the graphics side. Because a lot of the stuff that we're doing now is being run is probably being emulated, because we're not using the newer API calls, which would get us more speed. Um, and that's we with Engine 4, we went through and selectively used basically replaced some core routines and tied into newer architecture, and did see speed improvements, especially on um, loading big battles. And but that's one of those things. Again, you get into you might just be it might just be better off trashing it and starting over again. So I don't I expect that we'll run better on an M1 or whatever the Windows systems start using, but it's not going to be like, oh God, this is a whole new experience.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I mean, the one couple cool things that I did hear about it was like, I know that, and I was unfamiliar about this. Apparently, I found out that like when you're running, if you have like a gaming laptop and if you're like running combat mission on, let's say, an Acer Predator or something like that, and you're at Starbucks and you're enjoying a nice cup of coffee while, fighting the Russians in Black Sea, uh, once you pull that power plug off the wall, the I didn't know this, but the GPU and the CPU throttle itself, so this way it can give you a lot more. So it
Yeah.
doesn't just shut off on you. But I know with these new chips, with the new M1 Max, and I'm assuming possibly with the new Windows computers that are running on this architecture, it stays at 100%. So literally, you can unplug your laptop from the wall and still continue gaming as if it was still plugged in. And I thought that was kind of remarkable because I initially thought that was the way things ran, previously until I was told otherwise. And I said, "Oh, I didn't know that."
Yeah, that I don't know enough about them, but I'm not surprised, because earlier earlier laptops that started having good 3D hardware, the earlier generation, so let's just say 10 years ago, they had options for turning off um, essentially turning off the external card, let's say like an NVIDIA, disabling that and just running off of the onboard, essentially 2D graphics chip, because that took almost no power. And so we had problems with customers saying, oh, like I'm getting 0.5 frames per second. Well, turns out that they were in power saving mode, and basically the 3D card was disabled, and um, so all they could get was essentially a slideshow, and that was
Not fun.
that was purely for heat and power management, and that has largely gone away. So I've run off of a MacBook Pro,
Oh, cool.
and
Wow.
it now it it's now smart enough that it can disable and enable stuff as needed. So I'm imagining the M1s are just going to take that advance and push it even further.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised by that, which kind of leads me to my next question. Well, actually, my final question, which would be, so since we're talking about the future of computers, what's the future of combat mission? What can we expect? And I mean, you don't have to announce games or anything like that, but what can we expect in future releases of Combat Mission in 2022 and 2023?
Well, I mean, we're committed to tactical combat for pretty much forever, I think. I don't know how we've been doing it for 20 years. Most people go out of business in 5. So from a business standpoint, we think we're over the hump. But and we're still very motivated to be making these games, so that's good. Um, but I think that as much as we do have other interests in other types of games, this is still the one that we want to remain focused on. So I would say very safely for well into the future that we will be doing tactical combat at this level, just as the second version of Combat Mission Engine was at the same level as Combat Mission First Engine. Whatever comes after the engine we're working on now will be essentially the same subject matter.
Okay.
We're not gonna go to like, you know, global warfare or first person shooter or something like that. Where this is what we like to do.
Okay.
The yeah, and the other thing is that we were reassuring people a little while ago that we're not going to go to the software rental
Oh,
model.
thank you.
Yeah, I know. As somebody that just had to suck it up and rent rent a piece of development software, I hate. There are certainly advantages to it, and I understand why the big companies move to it because I used a $500 copy of Photoshop for I think 10 years. And that's really not what they want. Um, so I can understand why they moved to a model where I have to rent it $500 every year. But yeah, we're not going to do that with the games.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it because I do notice that a lot of publishers are kind of going that route. Um, I was actually looking for a couple of games recently, and they were like, they were kind of like throwing their gaming model, their new rents, games as a service kind of model. I was like, no, I want to own the game. I don't want to rent the game. And that, definitely goes for
Right.
like Combat Mission. I don't want to, rent it. I want to own my Combat Mission game. So I'm glad to hear that you guys are going to go down that road and continue just providing the games because I love going through my Steam library and just seeing Combat Mission, Combat Mission, Combat Mission.
Yep. Yep. So no change there.
All right, excellent. That's all the questions that I have. Is there anything that I missed that you want to kind of cover or anything like that?
No, well, I guess I just have to say that we are always ever thankful for our customer base. We've on the scale of game industry audience, we've appealed to a very small number of very dedicated customers, and we have felt very fortunate that we've had such a long-term relationship with our customers, and um, it's not blowing smoke up their butts to just say without them we wouldn't be here because without them we wouldn't be here.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah.
even our testers, we've had some of our testers have been testing for us for going on 20 years,
Oh,
and
wow.
I got to tell you their enthusiasm level is still the same as it was 20 years ago, and um, that's we are constantly amazed at what we've created with lots and lots and lots of help from the outside for direction. And yeah, we we're, we have no plans to stop doing it. That's for sure.
Glad to hear that. Well, thank you for coming on the show. I look forward to the installments or news that you guys have set for 2022. I'm sure they could probably get to knock our socks off as you did in 2021 and 2020. So look forward to that, and thanks again for coming on the show.
Well, it's my pleasure.